Hello, co-journeyers, and welcome back to The Truth So Help Me Good. I am your host, Barbara Landry, and together we continue to explore some of the bigger questions about this journey we call life. My special guest today is Sandra Schnakenburg. Sandra grew up in Barrington, Illinois. After earning a BS in finance at Arizona State University and an MBA from the University of Southern California, she and her husband Carl settled in Singapore and then Australia, where their twins Kyle and Alexis were born. After moving back to the United States, they lived in the Woodlands, Texas, where they raised their family. During that time, Sandra worked on and off in corporate finance until she took up the love of writing. A philosophy of curiosity and a promise led her to write her first memoir, The Housekeeper's Secret. So welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so happy to have you with us today. What a wonderful book. Incredibly moving, incredibly a page turner. And a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring story. So thank you so much for writing it. So
I'm thankful for asking me to write it, right?
yeah. So let's start there. Your book begins with Lee, your family's housekeeper, near death in 1994. Almost 30 years after coming to work with your family, and she asks you to do something. So tell us what it was that she wanted you to do and why she asked you, do you think?
Well, I love this question because it is an honor to write somebody's story that they wanted to write all their life, but they couldn't. She used to sit at our dinner table and go, I'm going to write a book one day and nobody will ever believe it. And the truth is, nobody knew the story. And when she asked me to write her book at the end of her life, I had no idea what her story that she wanted to write was. In fact, she never really told us her past, other than the past that she had a husband and son that died in a car accident, and she had no family, and then she came to our house. So we didn't, when we asked about her family, she got really angry and all that. So taking on this project was like taking agency for a dream that she had, but couldn't fulfill because she had lung cancer. And quite honestly, I don't think she wanted to tell her story while my mother was still alive. Because the inciting incident of the story came 15 years after she died, is when I found her ashes in my mom's closet after my mom's death. That's when the journey really began.
Right. So as you said, as you just said, from the beginning, Lee's life was a mystery. In fact, you were told, don't ask, don't question.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, what were some of the things you may have observed in Lee that you now realize were pieces of the puzzle? And I use that phrase for a reason, as I'm sure you know. So what were some of the clues that maybe you observed that sort of started to lay the foundation for what you would later discover?
Well, part of the reason Lee asked me to write the book is because I was a curious child and I asked her many, many questions about her past while we were living together, growing up, doing chores together. And every time she would get angry, I mean, I've never seen her so angry when I'd asked. And even it went so far as my mom would like punish me or she'd pull me aside. She'd say, if you keep asking Lee, she's going to leave. You need to stop asking her about her past. Her false teeth when she was very young, when she came to us, she was 38. Her walk was like she had been in an accident, something happened to her. She had frostbitten feet and hands that she told us, oh, you didn't know to put my gloves on you because you should always wear your gloves in the cold. I'm like, why didn't you go inside? There were a lot of things that didn't make sense. But the biggest thing that got me was she never mentioned the birth date or the death date of her child that supposedly died and her husband, like even that she was married. And one day I asked her out of the blue while we were cleaning, I said, Lee, what exactly, is Latoya your husband's name or is that your name? And she said, oh, that's my name. And I thought, well, you're married. So what was your married name? And she goes, enough already, enough questions. Let's go back to cleaning. So I never really got that. But this is not a spoiler, but she fabricated her past, her name, and her birth date. So the whole person she wasn't who she told us she was.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
And you were very, very young when she first came into your home. How old were you
It was
exactly?
3.5.
3.5. And she was in your life well into your adulthood.
Oh yeah, I was married.
And it was a very, very special relationship. Can you just share with us a little bit about your relationship with Lee and the impact that she had on you, especially as a child? And as
Yeah,
you, yeah.
yeah. Well, Lee and I were both the fifth children in our family. It's one thing I did know about her.
Oh,
And I also was in a car accident when I was 13 and experienced a traumatic brain injury. And Lee, with her wisdom, knew everything to do to get me back on my feet and sharpen my mind, my focus, and my memory. She was like the guy in Karate Kid who taught the boy how to clean. I was focused on shining brass faucets, chandeliers, vacuuming to the perfection of lines because she wanted me to focus on detail and she'd make me do things over and over and over again to the point of like, I would be so frustrated, but I taught me to focus. It taught me to care. And it also healed. It gave me a discipline. But so she knew that because I find out later she also had a traumatic brain injury. She knew everything about it. She had this wisdom. My mom used to say, how do you know all these things? And she'd say, well, I read a lot. And it was just all her cover. I read a lot. I realized. So all of us were reading all the time. We're like, just to, have that wisdom.
so what struck me right away was at the beginning of the book, you start with the promise to Lee, but then the book is about you. It's about Lee. It's about your whole family. So I'm thinking, wow, this. She's writing her own memoir as she's writing about Lee keeping this promise.
Right.
And so I wonder, curious, did you ever intend to write your own memoir before you undertook to write Lee's story as you had promised to do?
Well, that's a great question because I just wanted to write Lee's story. And oh my goodness, I would have never wrote my story if it wasn't for Lee. And yet the process of writing my story and braiding in her story and the journey, the investigative journey of her unveiling the truth, it unveiled my truth. So in the process of learning how to write in general, I just took a lot of writing classes and a lot of memoir writing classes. And they were all about memoir is about your life or a portion of your life. And I just was like, oh no, this is going to be about Lee and me and Lee. But no, the best coaches I had said, this is your journey discovering who Lee was in your family and then who Lee was, when you unveiled the truth of her, who she was before she came to your family, like
Right.
her secret, unveiling her secret. And I went on a podcast with a lady who does like plots. And I said to her, I said, I have a problem with my book. I think the audience is really not going to want to hear my story. Really a nobody. Why would they want to hear about all my dredges through the difficult times that I had emotionally as a child when they don't know who I am. But yet the process of tying in my story with who Lee was in my family ended up enriching the story so much. So anybody who's listening out there and is afraid to write their story, they really should think about how important it is to lean into the difficult times in your life because there's so much healing in reflection.
Right. Definitely. And I think that your story is is represents so much of who Lee was. I
Mhm.
mean, how she impacted you and the unfolding of your story is part of her story, and she is part of your story. They're inextricably bound together. And
Yeah, like you couldn't experience the shock of what happened to Lee later unless you knew who she was in our family and the
exactly.
pleasant, content, kind person who never showed any sign of having like a rough time or being a
Right.
victim of anything. And
Right.
that, you know, we find out differently.
So, having said that, in the telling of your story, you shared the details, some details about your parents' relationship, including the
Mhm.
fact that your father was, at least verbally abusive to your
Mhm.
mom and was a difficult person. He was a difficult father, you share for you, with you. And you also tell us about the bond that is created between your mother and Lee, and how Lee served to be a source of strength for your mother. Can you just talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, it was a beautiful bond. It was almost magical because like a divine appointment because two women from opposite paths and opposite lives come together in a heart form and they both love the Lord. And my mom suffered internally so deeply, but on the outside, it looked like she was living the perfect life. Lee, on the outside, has been through something. You can see she had some leftover scars. There's some walking issues. Like I said earlier, she had the false teeth. But on the inside, she had found a deep sense of peace and contentment. And she had an incredible amount of wisdom, like wisdom that can only come from experience.
Right.
So I believe that the combination of the two women had a deep respect for each other. And Lee felt so um, a part of my mother's journey to help her heal, get help, and get out of that marriage. He helped her. She had somebody to turn to inside her home that can give her wise advice to seek help and seek an attorney and seek psychologists and figure out what she's doing. And she was basically saying, Lillian, you have rights,
Right.
exercise them. And my mom was so beaten down. She didn't even feel like she was worthy of, didn't understand any of it
Yeah.
really. But Lee gave her the strength and empowerment. And I think that's one of the reasons my mom couldn't know Lee's truth at the end. I know this is a little added here, is that, Lee didn't want my mom to know that she had lied to get the job,
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. But it was definitely meant to be that you were all brought together. And the
Yeah,
way you portrayed is so beautiful. It's just so beautifully written. Again, I just can't tell you enough how I just couldn't stop reading it once I started.
really, thank you so much. Yeah.
So the theme of resilience is
Mhm.
expressed throughout the book. And you've talked a little bit about this, and maybe you can say more. How did Lee serve as a role model of strength and perseverance to you and all your family members? I mean, she, you're one of five? Yeah. So, I mean, that
Six,
was a
having
full
six.
house.
Mhm. Yeah. She knew everyone's secrets. And she never told them to my mother, my father, or any of the other children. And that's confidence. We had
Mm,
confidence in Lee. We confided in her with the deepest, our first kiss. You knew what we thought of, growing up, you go through all these awkward moments, and Lee helped us through them, even in days we came home crying and uncomfortable. I believe that she also added the spirit of in our life, just spirit through baseball that she
all right.
watched and through her love of baseball, she brought that in our home where when baseball game was on, the whole spirit of the house lifted. And all the family would just kind of come out of their rooms and gather around the table and watch Lee respond to each play. And we ended up all learning how to keep score with her. And she took us to games. But I think that was like a common thread of lifting up the household spirit because we're living in fear to some extent, walking on eggshells, wondering what dad was going to say about this or that in our life, or what he even, what was going to happen next with him, because you never know.
Right.
And that was just an uncomfortable way to live, but she taught us another way. She showed us another
Right.
way. Hmm.
So it sounds like she learned through her own experience how to cope, how to prevail, and shared those tips and tricks, that toolbox. She came with her own toolbox and she
Toolbox. I
shared
love
that with
that.
the family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that for her to have survived what she survived, which we can tell, listeners, it was the unthinkable.
Right.
That's what we can say.
Right.
It was what you would never imagine what she suffered. But to get through what she did, she made a choice, just like Viktor Frankl's book of The Meaning of Life. She
Yes.
made a choice to live fully in the moment. She
Yes.
didn't think about the past. She never thought about the future. She just lived fully in every single moment.
Yes.
And she taught us that, because all of us were living in fear of when dad came home, or what he did that morning, or what was going on. The past and the future were haunting us. And that's just not a way to live, really. So I think she showed us through her resilience of coming out of a tragic situation, which we didn't know when she was alive.
Right.
We'd never know because of her spirit. You'd never even think, if you had met her, that she had been through anything. That's the beauty of the story.
Right.
And getting to know Lee really before you know what happened to her, is that you said,
Yes.
how does an individual soul, how does a human being choose life, and choose joy, and choose helping other family member, choose healing of others, and through that she healed herself.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So the next actually two questions are kind of related, I see here. So, do you believe that you wrote the story that Lee wanted you to write? And then the other part of that question is, do you think she asked you to write the book for her, or do you think she actually asked you to write it for you?
Mhm. Well, I actually think she asked me to write the book for me, and partly for us to meet her family, meet whatever her other family that we didn't know about. Um, she knew I needed more healing, and writing this book was so challenging for me. It challenged every bit of my essence. I'm ADHD, OCD. I was always just running on the surface of everything, getting things done. It's like, and I learned to go deep. I learned to meditate. I learned to slow down and think deeper, and really became more of who my essence is because of this book. Thankfully for that. She's been my teacher. 30 years after she died, she
Right.
taught me how to be more me and help me heal more.
Wow.
So it
Wow.
was pretty awesome.
So
Yeah.
awesome. So
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you hope readers will take away from this book?
Wow. First of all, I'm blown away how many readers have commented out of the blue, strangers. I've gotten two more emails this morning from my website, and just talking about, they didn't know me from Adam, but they just couldn't believe how much the book touched them. I think people, one, they like to write their story. Two, they feel like they are healing by reading me come to terms with my emotion and truth, and really saying it like it is. Like, this is what I live, and now this is who I am. You can't really write a book unless you're healed. That is the truth. You have to reflect back on your days. And I would say that's part of the process. Is my first drafts were basically emotional dumps. They
Yeah.
were not something to publish. That's where I was thinking, I don't think this is for me, because I have too much anger or too much frustration. But then after I worked through it, I realized this is the story. Here is the story. I just need to tell the story. And I'm already on
Fabulous.
the other side of it to reflect upon it. So I hope they take portions of issues in the book, like there's narcissism, there's verbal abuse, there's eating disorder, there's secrets, there's resilience, there's survival. There's so many issues that people have survived and been through themselves,
Yes.
by reading this book, they attach to whatever issue they can relate to.
Wonderful.
Mm.
So thank you so much for writing it. It is a gift to everyone who reads it. There's no doubt in my mind. And thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. This
It's
is
been a
awesome. I love
pleasure.
talking about the story. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
It's a great story. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.